They've dealt with NCORP-affiliated former Ring researchers. They've dealt with the dead rabbits. They've dealt with Hindley. There's at least one other that needs to be dealt with after that, down in that basement. After Hindley was put out of his misery, Matthew was laughing at this, manically, not seeming to mind that his client was dead. This confused Heathcliff. Sinclair wanted to know what he was doing there, right next to the coffin. Masson didn't understand his motives, but he saw another lever had been attached to the coffin by itself. Ishmael wanted to know when that happened. Masson noted that it was immediately after the power outage. Matthew asked, what was there not to laugh about? He'd spent days upon days wishing he'd survived no matter how long he had to wait, so that he could survive until he could watch him die with his own eyes. Every day he imagined what kind of death would befit that prick. A prick like Hindley. Yet something was unsatisfying. There was always something missing. Ryushu noted what he was saying when he said every time, implying that this wasn't the first time this happened to him. Faust was silent, clearly not willing to say what she was theorizing. Matthew then admitted that he enjoyed this one, a dog's death, stinking with the hideous stench of defeatism. Heathcliff understood darkly that pulling that lever would kill the power, but it's not the only thing that it would do, asking if he's going to pull it. Matthew was, and before any had a chance to stop him, Heathcliff bolted up to the machine and grabbed his boss by the collars. Heathcliff felt that something was off about him earlier. He considered two possibilities. One, his boss had lost his mind while he was gone and he needed to beat some sense into him. His boss didn't have anything to say to respond to this, likely patiently waiting for him to finish. Two, he's some deranged lunatic pretending to be Matthew. Someone who should never be allowed near Catherine, asking him for his name, if it's really him. He said Matt, then admitted that he didn't go by Matt there. Yeah, I have a suspicion of what Faust was thinking right now. This confused Heathcliff. He'd grown complacent. Yes, this masked man had wasted a lot of time and effort to attempt to learn how to pass himself off as Matthew, down to his mannerisms. When he demonstrated his acting skills again, this provoked Heathcliff into a fight with the imposter and those few dead rabbits that were still alive. After the boss of the dead rabbits was incapacitated enough for him to not be as much of a threat, Heathcliff wanted to know what he wanted. He was getting tired of Hindley, him and his mysteries, threatening him with implied death by physical violence if he didn't talk. The dead rabbit's boss laughed crazily, understanding what that threat meant. Then he took off his mask and Heathcliff was shocked at what he saw. It was in fact himself, who was much less together inside, who saw introductions as unnecessary. He's him, and he's clawed his way back from hell. Sinclair wanted to know how there could be two of the same person. Faust understood the truth, that they weren't the same person. The one that they were up against was an identity. Brutus warned Faust to elaborate on that more. Or rather, wanted her to elaborate that more. Sinclair understood that he's a Heathcliff from one of the mirror worlds. The Heathcliff variant then spoke of all who challenged him, stood in his way, those that humiliated him. He intended to find them one by one and give them deaths that befit their crimes. In the end, he'd kill the one that killed Caffey with his own hands. Heathcliff wanted to know what he was talking about. The variant saw it as obvious. It's them. They are her murderers. Heathcliff saw this as a big load of demanding that he talk like a normal person, or then he asked how much did he know about Caffey's death. The variant told him that he had no love left for anyone in that world. The world in turn had none to spare him. Death or damnation were the only paths ahead of him. He was already cast into hell after Caffey's demise. But he's been watching Heathcliff going on his puerile adventures, dreaming of a heartfelt reunion with her, so he journeyed to that world, to take those hours away from him, so that he would feel the same despair that he did. This annoyed Heathcliff, shouting at him to stop talking in circles, asking if he, that variant, was the one that killed Caffey. The variant told him that it was them, it's what they were, how they were born to that world, a witless brigand, a vagrant, a thing wrapped in a filthy, sinking rag of a sack. This started to get to Heathcliff, who couldn't deny this. Then the variant asked what was Heathcliff's first thoughts when he heard the news about her death. Heathcliff said with a dark expression that he would pursue her murderers to the ends of the earth. Then he calmed enough, somewhat, and said plainly that he'd kill every last one of them. The variant loudly agreed with him. They shouldn't be allowed to live, asking Heathcliff if he agreed. He could kill them and tear them apart 100 times and it still won't be enough, because it won't even compare to the terrible suffering that awaited him. Heathcliff was starting to buy into the variant's that he was Catherine's murderer. He was the wretch that killed her. The variant told him that the endless, excruciatingly sleepless nights awaited him in the future. He wouldn't see her, but her beckoning voice shall haunt him and torment him until the day that he died, asking him if he can't hear her now. She weeps. According to the variant, it snowed the day that they buried Caffey. He stood there by her grave, nothing but the cold wintry gusts to accompany his vigil. Yes, accompanying the vigil, and he's likely mentioning how his version of Caffey was buried. He still feels this, asking where Caffey was, believing that she still resents him from a place that's beyond his reach, seeing her as beside him upon that earth. Dante saw that this Heathcliff variant was broken and deranged, one that never had anyone to help him keep sane. This variant kept shouting at Caffey to torment him until his last breath. Yes, until his last breath, and this Heathcliff off, which the variant was counting on, wanting him to break into 1,000 shards, so that he may be driven mad with suffering, so that Caffey may forgive him even a little. Well, a bit late for that. Heathcliff told him to stop, and they fought that variant, who was clearly much stronger than the one that they know. This variant of Heathcliff who lost his Catherine after he left Wuthering Heights, she was buried in winter. As for how he fought much like Heathcliff due to similar backgrounds. When the variant was at 40% HP, their Heathcliff glared at the variant. This was taking self-hatred to a new level. The variant told him that his puerile adventure ended there, telling him to cast aside, or rather cast himself off the cliffside of suffering. Let his sorrow antagonize him until he reached the bottom. The smallest atonement that he could pay Cathy as her murderer. Heathcliff was not amused by him carrying on with this even now. Then a check happened, and if it passed, Heathcliff agrees that as he charged at him and struck him on the head, he'd kill him first regardless. This made the variant laugh. He was counting on that, encouraging him to hate him, like he was a Sith Lord, wanting him to pummel him until he was a puddle of blood. One of many variants that he'll slay on his path to his own demise. They'll both plummet into the abyss. He was truly deranged, but this granted Heathcliff 5 protects and 3 attack power-up for the rest of the encounter, and the others could also damage the variant more for the rest of the encounter. This also doubled the stagger threshold for the variants, including any tremor bursts. However, if the check fails, the variant saw this coming and counterattacked. He told him to accept his fate and welcome the embrace of death. The dialogue was mostly the same after that. The rewards were largely the same as well, except Heathcliff received 3 fragile instead of 5 protection. Regardless of how the check went, the fight continued. Once the variant was defeated, Heathcliff used his own body sack EGO, while believing that the variant and everything that crushed him under their feet built a wall between him and Cathy. He'll shove him all in that bag, drag it to the deepest corners of Inferno, using it to such a ferocity that it not only did so much damage that it broke the damage total. It even broke the walls of reality as they emerged in the graveyard. He completed his rant by saying that he'd pummel it until his strength failed. The variant was dying, but he had some last words. He believed that every Catherine was destined to be miserable. It's why he saw it as necessary to kill all Heathcliffs in every world. Okay, what is this? A version of The One starring Jet Li? As there's a similar plot there, although this Heathcliff variant is doing this for much less rational reasons. The variant believed that Heathcliff would have done the same. Then the variant died, and reality was restored to what it was. After this battle, we see the past of this variant of Heathcliff, who was outside of Wuthering Heights, and Nellie had somehow found him. He asked if Cathy was dead, asking Nellie politely to give him a history of the event. How did Cathy die? Asking if she passed away with the same kind smile on her face. Nellie said that she died quietly as a lamb. Heathcliff asked if she mentioned him. Nellie told him that she couldn't. Her senses never returned. She lay with a sweet smile on her face. Her life closed in a gentle dream, hoping her final slumber to be a peaceful one. Heathcliff didn't accept this. He wanted her to wake in torment, much to Nellie's bewilderment, believing that he killed Kathy, asking her if he did, seeing himself as Kathy's murderer, shouting at Kathy to haunt him, to be the ghost and haunt him, be with him always, not to leave him in that abyss, where he can't find her, he can't live without her. Nellie didn't understand Heathcliff's words. Heathcliff told Kathy that she may not rest as long as he's living, and nor shall he. Then we switched to a flashback of... We switched to a flashback of when Dante asked the Heathcliff that we're familiar with why he left Wuthering Heights. Was it where the love of his life lived? Heathcliff remembered Dante asking that question. But that was the wrong question. They should have asked why he endured. Why did he endure the thrashings, the humiliation, the scorn, the pain, the starvings? He endured it all, weathered it, let it pass over him. It's what he always did. He left Wuthering Heights because he finally realized something. Heathcliff overheard Catherine telling Nellie that Linton will be quite affluent soon. If she was to marry him, she could be the greatest inventor of the neighborhood. She might even be awarded the Inventor of the Year award from Decor. Nellie asked, what if Heathcliff... Catherine told her not to be so foolish, seeing this as degrading. If she was to marry Heathcliff, they'd both be destitute, if that was to happen. Then Heathcliff heard Carmen's voice, who said, Tell me why you couldn't bear to remain at Wuthering Heights anymore. Heathcliff told her that it was because he finally understood that Catherine didn't love him. If he was to stay there and watch her marry Linton, right before her eyes, he would have done something so violent, so brutal against Linton. Or even Kathy. That was something that he couldn't stand, not even entertaining the idea of this. That's why he ran, from the manner that degraded him, made him a wretch, from the manner that taught him love, only to deprive him of it. He saw himself as a wretch, from the moment he was born, a lowly thing that shouldn't have been allowed there in the first place. It's why he tore himself from it. But he never gave up on Kathy. He only wanted her to realize that she was wrong, to regret what she did, so that she'll one day return to him. Then Carmen asked, but what about now? Heathcliff saw it as pointless. Carmen then asked, then what can you do now? Then we remembered the former Ring researcher, posing as an Arifi fixer, saying that, as per the deceased's wishes, the will shall be read out aloud there, at Catherine's manor. Then Linton told Heathcliff that Catherine was dead. They were married. Then the Heathcliff variant told him that Catherine lies dead because of him. Does he still fail to understand? They were her murderers. That every Catherine was destined to be miserable because of Heathcliff. Then Heathcliff was shown the fragments of every possible world, and in every world, in every single strand of infinite possibilities, Heathcliff broke her heart, condemning her to a death most wretched. The variant's head hurt. His was bleeding, and that... Heathcliff heard the sound of his distant self bashing his head against a tree trunk. He told Cathy that he was back. Carmen then asked him to look at him. What does he feel? Heathcliff asked if his variant was even a human, seeing him as a bundle of waste wrapped in a filthy rag that only resembles human flesh. He sees himself as changed, that he'll show her that he's grown as a person. And then he realized that it could never have worked from the start. How could it, when he's not even the person? Carmen asked, what does he think of himself? Heathcliff questioned that if he even deserved to speak as humans did. He killed Catherine. He drove himself away from her. Must be something less than a savage beast. Then, why should he keep pretending to be human when he's not? If they, like the Linden and Hindley, were right, that he really was to be nothing more than a howling savage beast. Carmen described a world, heartbroken hound, abandoned by his master, asking him if that is the shape of his heart and its desire, isn't it? Heathcliff confirmed this. He would become an infernal hound, snarling, tearing at the fabric of the city, and he will shove its remnants into his sack and grate it across the broken earth. As he was distorting, he cursed himself and everything that did this to himself. And Cathy. Carmen then said that it can be as he wished. Then we had a vision of the past where Catherine told Heathcliff to run. Heathcliff saw that her ankle. She told him to go. He then promised that he'll come back for her. Then as his distortion was complete, he heard her voice saying, "Welcome home, Heathcliff." Okay, before we move on to the Act 3 lore, let's talk about this. Both with the Heathcliff variant and Carmen, they were being very selective with their words. Far too selective for me to not be suspicious. As there's bound to be some worlds where it actually worked out, or perhaps they never met. For example, there's likely to be a world where instead of Mr. Earnshaw picking him up and taking him to Wuthering Heights, it's someone from the Dicey Association that finds him. And they never meet. Well, the Dicey Association picks up orphans to recruit into that association. Or perhaps a world where Heathcliff heard her out before doing anything, or confronted her about that statement. I mean, it's as if they're presenting the facts in such a way that it fits their interpretation. The main reason why it works on him was because he was already full of self-loathing, and he didn't have enough mental strength to overcome it. Unlike Virgilius, who would likely be most interested, rather, to hear things from Heathcliff's perspective. He'd certainly recognise the voice, and I can't believe that none of them caught Dongrang refer to Carmen by name. Yes, and this was when he manifested the Farmwatch EGO, in Chapter 4. Faust is likely to be the only one that would know the significance of Carmen, but if she's going to tell any of them, it's unlikely to be anytime soon. Then there's the situation with Wuthering Heights. None of them are without guilt. Mr. Earnshaw was playing favourites with Heathcliff, Hindley used that as an excuse to beat him. Linton was in on this, while Heathcliff did nothing but encourage this, while Catherine said that marrying Heathcliff would bring her only destitution, which drove him away, which also caused her harm, partly of her doing, partly because Heathcliff didn't get it from the source. Then there's the reason for her marrying Linton, and not for love. It's for the glory of being an inventor there. But with all that's going on, her potentially being a gold digger is the least of her problems. It's certainly not Game of Thrones level of up families. But there's clearly something wrong with them. Well, for a start, there's no Sweet Home Alabama going on there. Let's hope not. Then we have Heathcliff distorting. Now, this is interesting, as Moses said that those that have manifested their own EGO can't distort, which implies that this EGO, that he and the rest of the damned doesn't have, that's truly theirs, is incomplete, as in not fully manifested, and thus they're not immune from distorting. Which means that near the monolith they only had resistance to it, compared to the others. Carmen is clearly one that now seeks to break people's minds on such a grand scale, to the point that the Batman villain, Scarecrow, would probably kneel before a picture of her praying for her guidance. Now, while this is what she is now, it's likely not what she was, as she wanted to cure the disease of the mind, and when Kali, the Red Mist, had initial problems wielding the mimicry prototype, she helped her to overcome the inherent difficulties, which led her to manifest an EGO suit that's truly hers. Likely the strain on her own mind got to her, which led Carmen to kill herself. But Aeon still needed her, and he put her brain and nervous system into a tank, and there she stayed for over 10,000 years during the Seed of Light projects. Over 10,000 years like that. It would drive anyone insane. It would certainly explain why Carmen is what she is now, and what motivates her to do what she's doing. I don't know how her daughter Angela can stop her, but let's hope she has a way of doing so, although it won't help the rest of the damned dozen, as now they have Heathcliff to deal with, who will be even more unreasonable than usual. Well, that's one way to end Act 2. Heathcliff being more feral than he usually is. Until next time. Hail the rabbit!